Hello. So my name is Lisa Shea, and today we're going to look at Haida the Shepherd, which is featured in The Spark of Modernism, 20 Speculative Stories and Writings That Defined an Era, 1886 to 1939, edited by William James and Robert. So, Haida the Shepherd is written by Ambrose Bierce, and if you haven't read the works by Ambrose Bierce, he is an absolutely amazing, amazing author. Lived from 1842 to 1914. He is mostly known because he was in the Civil War, and he saw all sorts of, as you know, many people in the Civil War did, all sorts of horrific injuries, horrific battles, and many of his stories feature gruesome injuries and little children coming across dead soldiers and all sorts of really nasty stuff. And this was, true horror, we'll say, as compared to vampires or werewolves or other things that many people consider horror in nowadays. These were people who went through things that no human being should have to go through. And he was a very talented author, so he was able to write about these things in a way that conveyed their sense to a larger audience. So once the Civil War was over, he became a journalist, and then he became a writer. And much of his journalism was in the form of these either short stories or fables. He loved writing fable format, and he did over 300 fables over his journalist lifetime, and he would write fables about the way people were not paying attention to the current politicians or the way politicians were taking advantage of people or all that kind of stuff. So he really enjoyed that format in general. In 1871, when he was 29, he got married. He had 2 boys and a girl, and he started writing a lot of the stories we know him for, like the Owl Creek in 1890 and so on, right around the time that he discovered his wife after 16 years was cheating on him. So in 1888, he discovered his wife was cheating. He started writing some of his more hard-hitting stories like Missing in Owl Creek. And around that same time period is when he wrote An Inhabitant of Carcosa and Haida the Shepherd, which is this one. So while Missing in Owl Creek are more of the Civil War kinds of horror, The Inhabitant of Carcosa is more of a science fiction speculative kind of story, we'll say, and Haida the Shepherd is definitely in fable form and less of a gory horror and more of a just the world sucks and why are we even trying kind of thing. So that was a theme through a lot of Bierce's works. And I'll also comment that he wrote this in 1891. 2 years ago, his 17-year-old son had fallen madly in love with a woman. The woman agreed to marry him. They were all set to get married. And then 2 days before the marriage was to take place, his fiancée, the son's fiancée, ran off with his best friend. So the 2 of them go off, destroy the son's life. He's this poor little 17-year-old kid. And then they come back to talk with him about it. And he ends up shooting and killing his best friend and shooting but not killing his fiancée, and then committing suicide. So the 17-year-old kills another young man, nearly kills the woman that ran off on him, kills himself, and this is part of what Ambrose, the father, has to deal with right after his wife is caught cheating. So he's got reasons to feel hopeless, besides all the Civil War stuff he went through, and besides the injuries that he himself is coping with from his time in the Civil War. So all of that forms the background for him then embarking on a project like writing this fable, Haida the Shepherd. So this is not a happy-go-lucky kind of fable. This is a fable about life sucks and we're just trapped in this endless world. So let's take a look at Haida the Shepherd. And I'll notice that, note that the I with 2 dots over it is normally read as a separate vowel from the letter before. So like naive is a word that is normally N-A-I-V-E with the I with 2 dots, and Haida should also, as far as I can find, be pronounced as 2 separate vowels, Hey-ita. All right. So part of why Haida the Shepherd is so famous, in addition to just being one of Ambrose Bierce's works, is that this story was read by Robert Chambers, who loved writing speculative fiction, this and An Inhabitant of Carcosa. And Chambers loved the names Carcosa and Hastur, which is the name of one of the gods in this. And he used them for his story, just in a different way. He liked the names. And then Lovecraft read Chambers' works, and Lovecraft also loved the names. So then Lovecraft started using the names Hastur and Carcosa for his works. And then that got picked up. Hester becomes a character in Good Omens, and the whole mythos becomes part of True Detective, the TV series. So it all took on a life of its own, but they're not the same characters as what is featured in Haida. It's just that the name was a cool name, and the god idea was a cool name. So that's how it all got started. So in a way, he inspired the rest of them. You have to imagine if this story hadn't been good in the first place, the others would never even have heard of him to think about the story names. All right, so we have the young man, Haida, who is a happy-go-lucky shepherd boy. He doesn't have any family, so there's no sense of where he came from or how he started, and even he doesn't know. All he knows is that he's been a shepherd for as long as he can remember. He lives all alone. He rises every morning to pray at the shrine of Hastur, which is the god of shepherds. So this Hastur god is presented as a fairly quiet god, not some sort of a world-destroying master evil god across the galaxies. So he rises every morning, he prays to Hastur. Hastur is pleased that he's getting prayed to. Haida takes his group of sheep out of the little corral that he keeps them in. He goes off with his meal of curds and oatcake. I have to wonder where he's getting his oatcake from, because he's not growing oats. So clearly there are other people around, but they are never mentioned except for one in particular. So he goes off with his curds and oatcake. They go to a field, and then they just hang out in the field. And he watches the sheep to make sure that they are okay and they don't get stuck in a ditch or something like that. And it says that he's built himself a reed pipe and that he plays music for himself on his reed pipe. And sometimes he sees minor sylvan deities in the nearby woods listening to him. But if he looks at them directly, they vanish. So he decides that happiness may come if not sought, but if looked for, it will never be seen. So this is a key part of the whole philosophy here, that you can't actually be happy, that if you try to be happy, it'll never happen, but it might just randomly happen on its own when you're not paying attention for just a tiny little glimpse. So this is like the only thing that he really cares about is these minor little glimpses of the sylvan deities, in addition to the favor of Hastur, who's making sure that he has good weather and that his flocks don't get sick and that kind of stuff. So at night, he goes back to his fold and tucks them in the corral, sees that the gate is secure, and then goes into his cave to sleep. So that's how his life goes. He goes out with his flock, he plays some music, occasionally he sees a little minor deity, and then he goes back home to sleep. It doesn't say anywhere where he's getting his food, but we will just, this is a fable. So the only time that his life gets a little disturbed is when storms come through, and he assumes that the storms are the wrath of an offended god. And when this happens, he hides in his cave, and he prays that he might be punished for his sins, because he assumes he did something wrong to cause these storms to come. And he prays that the rest of the world will be saved from destruction, that they not be punished for something that he has done, because he's sure that everything revolves around him, and it's only his actions which could possibly cause these storms. So he intercedes for the people in the great cities, which he was told lay in the plain beyond the two blue hills which form the gateway of his valley. So he knows there's big cities out there somewhere, but he's never actually seen them for himself. And I'll note that there are some people who say, oh, these cities represent Sodom and Gomorrah because there are two of them, but I've never found anywhere in here, and I'll see on this rereading, that there are two cities. There are just great cities out there, meaning lots of cities, beyond the two blue hills, which are just, the edge of the valley that he's in. So anyway, he says, thank you that I can hide in, thank you God that I can hide in my cave and keep safe, and please don't hurt the rest of the world. And Hastur, who is the god, says, oh, well, all right, I will spare the cities, and I will make sure that they stay safe because I treasure the worship of this youth. Which is sort of implying that he really is about to destroy the world just because this one shepherd boy did who knew what, didn't look after a sheep well enough or something like that. So anyway, Haida goes on living this way. He lived this way since he could remember. He couldn't think of any other way he'd ever lived, and the only person he ever talks to is a holy hermit, which lives at the head of the valley, which is an hour away. So he has to walk a whole hour to get to the holy hermit, which he can finally, talk to and give information to or so on. And he feels sorry for the people in the great cities because they have no sheep. And he assumes that when he was young, he must have been small and helpless as a lamb, and he doesn't know where he was born or his family or anything like that. So he's sitting there thinking about oh, there must be cool cities somewhere, and the holy guy is pretty cool. And he thinks about the horrible change to silence and decay, which he felt sure must sometime come to him, as he had seen it come to so many of his flock, as it came to all living things except the birds. How in the world has a shepherd lived without ever seeing a hawk attack a bird or a baby bird fall out of a nest? Surely he knows that birds die too. So this is a little bizarre that somehow he thinks birds are immortal. But okay, so he's a little confused and he thinks that there are immortal birds that never ever die, and he's never seen a dead bird in the mouth of a cat or a fox or something else. And while he's thinking about all these things except birds dying, he realizes that he must be miserable, therefore, because things die. Which, again, doesn't make sense for me, because people who are living in the natural world and are raising sheep know that sheep are born and died and that they live reasonably happy lives. But again, Bierce is a very dark-souled person with everything that he's gone through, especially with the things he's gone through in the past couple of years between his wife cheating on him and his son killing someone and committing suicide. So he's got a pretty dark view on life. So Haida decides that his life is miserable, that he needs to know where he came from in order to be happy. He needs to know if he's doing the things that he should be doing correctly, like raising the sheep and so on, because if he's doing it incorrectly, then he's doing it wrong, and that's awful, and he needs to know what the correct way is to do those things. And what contentment can I have when I know not how long it is to last? How could I possibly be happy if I might die tomorrow, or if I might die in 20 years? I need to know. And then he says, which is a fair point, is what if something happens to me, what happens to the sheep? Because there's no one else around. So if he actually, tripped and got hurt or something, then the sheep are all going to, what if they're locked in their enclosure? They could all starve to death, and that would suck. So that at least is a fair point to me. So anyway, thinking about these things now, suddenly he's melancholy and morose. He doesn't talk cheerfully to his flock. He barely talks to Hastur the god. When he hears whispers on the breeze, he thinks it must be evil gods that are now watching him and judging him. Clouds are dangerous. He doesn't play his pipe well, and his the Sylvan gods and the riparian intelligences no longer listen to him but flee because they think that he's being so morose. He doesn't pay attention to his sheep and they get lost, so everything is just falling apart. So he's sitting there feeling sorry for himself, thinking that his life sucks, and he says, all right, I am just not going to do anything. I am going to do the best I can, and if I'm screwing things up, well, it's the gods' fault because they're not bothering to tell me what I should be doing, and how am I supposed to just sit here and guess? So as he says this and says, fine, screw everybody, I'm just going to plow forward my life, a great brightness fell upon him, causing him to look up, thinking the sun had come out. But no, it was a beautiful maiden. So beautiful she was that the flowers about her feet folded their petals in despair and bent their heads in tokens of submission. So sweet was her look that the hummingbirds thronged to her eyes, thrusting their thirsty bills almost into them, which is a little creepy. And the wild bees were about her lips, which are also a little creepy. So the shadows of all objects fell divergent, turning as she moved. So the most beautiful woman in the entire multiverse has showed up, and he's never even seen a woman as far as we know. He's only ever seen the old guy. But somehow he knows that this is a woman and the most beautiful woman, and that he is just entranced by her. So, it actually says he was entranced. Yeah, he kneels at her feet in adoration, and she says, no, I'm not a goddess. You're not supposed to worship me. But if you are truthful and dutiful, then I will abide with thee. Kitty, I'm reading this. Yes, you are very cute. You are very cute. Here, come over here, sweetie. Here we are. Here, what if I move this? Hold on. All right. Move that out of the way. Move that out of the way. Look, now you got a spot right here, right next to the book. Ooh. Right off the book. There you go. Right there. See, you could be right there in your own little spot. There we go. All right, good kitty. Excellent. All right, now we have a cat participant in this. All right, so she says, I'm not a goddess, but if you are truthful and dutiful, then I will stay with you. So her only qualifications on staying with him is that he tell the truth and that he do his duty. And his only reason for caring for her is that she's beautiful. He doesn't care what she thinks about or what she talks about or anything else. He just wants to stare at her because she's pretty. So he seizes her hand and he says, "Oh, thank you for being with me. I appreciate it," and so on. And he says, "Tell me thy name and where you come from." So all he wants to know is, what should I call you, so I don't say, "Hey girl, come over here," or "Hey you," or that sort of thing. And just by asking her that very normal, non-invasive question, she pulls away. Her beauty undergoes a visible alteration which makes him shudder. Even though she's still beautiful, now she's like a dark beauty. The landscape darkens by a giant shadow, and her voice seems to come from a distance. And she says, "Presumptuous and ungrateful man, must I then so soon leave?" I'm trying to read around the cat. "Would nothing do but thou must at once break the eternal compact." So somehow she thinks that he's broken the compact by asking her name, which was never part of any sort of agreement. But now she's just making up rules, which is part of Ambrose's issues here, is that women in particular just make up rules because, his wife left him and his son's fiancé left him. So that's what women are. We just make up rules and then we claim that you've broken the rules and punish you with no warning. So anyway, Haida falls on his knees and says, please stay, but no, she has taken off. And she says, "You will never have me by seeking. Go to thy duty, faithless shepherd, or we will never meet again." So why is he faithless? He's faithless because he's asked for her name, which she never said was against the rules. So anyway, now night has fallen, there's wolves out there, the sheep are petrified, and he gets his sheep safely back to their fold, and he gives gratitude for Hastur that he got the sheep back safely, and then goes to his cave and sleeps. So the next morning he wakes up, and there's the maiden again, and she smiles at him, a smile that seemed the visible music of his pipe and reeds. And he didn't want to say anything because now he's petrified that anything that he says is going to make her unhappy because she's just a crazy I'm just woman who does things for no reasons at all, is what I'm getting at. All right, so he just smiles at her because he doesn't want to say anything at all. And she says, "Okay, well, the reason I came back is because you were doing your duty to your flock, and you said thank you to Hastur, the god of the shepherds, and I'm here. Will you have me for a companion?" So she's asking him a question. Now, it would be rude if he didn't answer, but how is he supposed to answer and not say something that's going to upset her? So he says, "Who would not have thee forever? Oh, never again leave me until I change and become silent and motionless," meaning dying, because for some reason, even though he lives around sheep and foxes and everything else, he doesn't know what the word for death is. He knows become silent and motionless. Now, unfortunately, apparently this was okay to say. Asking her not to leave him is an okay thing to ask. But then he says, "I wish that thou wert of my own sex, that we might wrestle and run races and so never tire of being together," which is super bizarre. I mean, we could say this is back in, what was this written, 1891. So this is back in 1891, where apparently women could not, have fun and run races and do fun things together. They were just supposed to sit there on a chair and be stared at and admired for being beautiful until they weren't beautiful anymore, in which case I guess you put them in the attic or something like that. So he's saying, "I wish you were male, because males I could have fun with. A woman, I just have to sit and stare at you all day and admire you." And how would he even know? Because he apparently has never been around a male or a female except for the old wizened guy that he talks to. But in any case, after saying, "Well, I wish you were someone I could have fun with instead of a woman that I could just stare at," she leaves. Which one could say is maybe a good thing if that's the way he looks at things. And Haida is upset at her leaving, so he goes running out, and he finds that there's rain falling, and the stream is rising, and the sheep are crying out in terror because now the rising waters are in their fold area, they're a corral. And he sees that the cities could even drown because he's made everyone so unhappy by saying he wishes he had a fun companion instead of a boring woman that would just sit there and look beautiful. And the maiden's gone. So he passes a couple days being alone again with his sheep and not knowing what to do. And then he goes off to bring milk and oatcake and berries to the holy hermit. Again, I have to wonder where this oatcake is coming from. Maybe someone leaves it in front of his cave because they feel sorry for him. But he has brought the used milk and oatcake and berries to the hermit because the hermit can't make food for himself at this point because he's so old. And as Haida's walking back to his cave again, he says, "Oh, I feel sorry for the old guy. Maybe I should bring him to my cave because that way I can take care of him better because he's a whole hour away from me now. And it's hard to get out there to keep an eye on him and make sure he's okay. What if he falls and hurts him something? And it would be a good thing for me to take care of him. And thanks for all of the times he's talked to me over the years." Which is nice of him. Now, he doesn't say I should ask him if he wants to come and live in the cave with me. He's just like, I'm going to go Shanghai him. What if the hermit likes living where he is at the head of the valley? But in any case, as he's saying these nice things about I'll take care of the hermit because I feel like someone should take care of him, the maiden appears, clad in all glittering garments, and she smiles at him with a smile which takes away his breath. And she says, "I am come again to dwell with thee, if thou wilt now have me, for none else will." Well, I wonder why no one else will if she keeps just disappearing on a whim. "Thou mayest have learned wisdom and art, willing to take me as I am, nor care to know." Well, I suppose in the second case where he says, "I wish you could run and jump and play with me," he wasn't taking her as she was. Although he never even asked if she knew how to run or jump or play. For all he knew, she did enjoy running and jumping and playing. But she seems to be implying that she doesn't want to run or jump or play. She just wants to sit there and be admired for her beauty. Kitty? Kitty? You don't have to eat everything in sight. I have to try to move things out of the kitty's grasp. You do have food, Kitty, over in your food dish. Alright. So anyway, she's saying, take me as I am, and I will stay with you. So, Haida threw himself at her feet. "Beautiful being," he cried, "if thou wilt but deign to accept all the devotion of my heart and soul, after Hastur be served, it is yours forever. But alas, thou art capricious and wayward. Before tomorrow's sun I may lose thee again. Promise, I beseech thee, that however in my ignorance I may offend, thou wilt forgive and remain always with me." So he's being pretty honest here and saying, "You know what, you told me to be truthful back in the beginning, and I'm being truthful now. I keep saying that I want you to stay with me, and you keep running off for no reason at all. Please just stay, and if I do something that you're upset with, just forgive me. And know that I didn't do it out of malice or anything, and stay with me anyway, because this whole abandoning me all the time is hurtful." So, scarcely had he finished speaking when a troop of wolves sprang out of the hills and came racing toward him with fiery eyes and dreadful howls. The maiden vanishes, and he flees for his life. He gets to the humble dwelling of the holy hermit, and he bars the door against the wolves, and he casts himself upon the ground and weeps. The hermit says, "My son, it is not like thee to weep for wolves. Tell me what sorrow has befallen thee, that age may minister to the hurts of youth with such balms as it hath of its wisdom." So the hermit's saying, what in the world is going on? Are you really that upset about wolves? We've had wolves our entire lives, and they're just part of life. So Haida told him all, how thrice he had met the radiant maid, and thrice she had left him forlorn. He related minutely all that had passed between them, omitting no word of what had been said. So now he's just told the entire story to the holy hermit. It's like a tongue twister. To hear the words of wisdom from the holy hermit. When he had ended, the holy hermit was a moment silent, and then said, "My son, I have attended to thy story, and I know the maiden. I have myself seen her, as have many. Know then that her name, which she would not even permit thee to inquire, is Happiness. Thou saidst well to her that she was capricious, for she imposes conditions that man cannot fulfill, and delinquency is punished by desertion. She cometh only when unsought, and will not be questioned. One manifestation of curiosity, one sign of doubt, one expression of misgiving, and she is away. How long didst thou have her at any single time before she fled?" At any time before she fled. I'm trying to read around the cat head. And he says, "But a single instant," blushing with shame at the confession. "Each time I drove her away in one moment." And the wise man says, Unfortunate youth, but for thine indiscretion, thou mightest have had her for 2. So the lesson of this whole story is that life sucks. You don't get happiness. and that if you do get granted happiness in the form of a beautiful maiden who, like, you don't know at all what she's interested in or what you could talk about or anything else, whose only stated trait is that she's beautiful, and that you can only have her for a second or two before she's going to vanish because you're going to do something wrong and she's going to race off. So clearly I disagree with this fable in many cases, but you also have to, like I said, understand where Bierce was coming from when he was writing this. He loved writing fables, and I suppose I'm okay with him writing fables about cheating politicians and how you should be aware of cheating politicians and how people shouldn't act like sheep and should think for themselves and all these other kinds of things. So those kinds of fables I understand the point of, and I think they serve a useful point. This one is more of a horror fable where its only purpose is to say that everything sucks and that happiness is hopeless, which goes against the way that I tend to think about the world. I suppose that's the way that I'll put it. So, I mean, certainly I read horror stories, and I love Bierce's other horror stories, and, the Owl Creek one, where a civilian is drawn into, well, I suppose I won't give away, you should read them. You should read all of them. I won't give away all the storylines. But in a lot of his stories, there is hopelessness, and there are people who get punished for doing things that they think are the right things, and people who just get caught up into a world beyond their control and suffer all sorts of nasty things. So that is a way that he writes, and I understand the purpose of writing that. It just goes against my personal mindset that this young man is living all alone and is doing what he's doing. And okay, I can understand the crisis of faith that he says, why am I even here? Why am I doing this? Why aren't the gods telling me if I'm doing a good job or not a good job? Why are they threatening to punish the entire cities just because I do something wrong when I don't even know what I'm doing wrong? And you can say, why are the gods letting him believe that and have all that suffering on his shoulders when it's not true? But when it comes to this whole maiden thing, I'm especially unhappy with the thought that this maiden is being valued just because she has a pretty face, that she can't be referred to by a name because that would be disrespectful somehow, and that she is representing in many ways all of womankind as being just completely flippant and uncaring and tormentous, and that her purpose is just to walk around, be pretty, and then if a guy shows any interest or does anything at all, she's going to smash him like a little bug and make him miserable. So I'm not keen on those messages of this, but I understand why Bierce feels, with what he's gone through, that these are valid messages that he wants to share with the world, and that he's writing a horror story. So, he's not writing about every single woman in this. He's writing about a particular situation with a particular woman who acts this way. So what other messages do we get out of this? I had to read this a number of times before I came around to a point where I could find a way to approach it that I didn't just feel unhappy about. Because, again, I study a lot of Buddhism and Zen Buddhism and a lot of other cultures and religions, and this goes against the way that I see the world, but I understand the horror view and also Bierce's personal life inflicting all sorts of really nasty harms on him, both from the Civil War and from his wife cheating on him, and then his son getting cheated on, run off on, and then committing suicide. And it's worth noting that the second son, who lived another 10 years or so, then died of alcoholism. So their family was just not a happy family by this point. They went through quite a lot of things. In terms of the writing is beautiful. Definitely Bierce has mastered the fable format. He writes wonderful descriptions. He really brings the scenes to life, and you get a sense of what the characters are feeling. There is very little mention of the god. So in terms of people coming at this from a Lovecraft point of view or a Good Omens or True Detective kinds of point of view, the only reason that the god has any meaning at all is because he has that name. And, the god Hester is only mentioned in the sense that he is prayed to, and then he cares about the prayers of the shepherd enough that he protects the cities from harm. And he doesn't interfere with this whole maiden situation? And did he send the maiden? It's sort of unclear. The maiden is happy that the shepherd is being dutiful to Hester, so maybe they're related in some sort of a way, but it's not made clear that Hester deliberately sent the maiden. And if he did, why would he send someone to torment the shepherd who is coming around to a place of happiness? You could say the shepherd was really happy at the beginning. He's hanging out with his sheep, he's playing his flute, he has his little sylvan god friends, and he's not asking for anything more. And then when he gets into his period of despair, you could say part of it is the god's fault for just sitting there tormenting him with storms and then never really praising him for doing anything good. So maybe if the god had been a little more supportive and said, "You're doing a good job, I appreciate you," that sort of thing, then the shepherd wouldn't have gone into a despair saying, "How come I do the best that I can?" And then these storms still come and are pretty much preparing to destroy everything. So when Haida gets to the point of saying, "Fine, I don't care, I'm just going to do the best job that I can," this is when he's granted a glimpse of happiness. But it's only a glimpse of happiness that then makes him miserable. So you could say, well, maybe Hester sent happiness down to say, okay, you've come to a good place in your life, I'm going to give you a little glimpse of happiness. But is it really a good thing if all you're doing is giving someone a glimpse of something and then taking away and saying, "Ha, you can never have this"? That seems more torturous than really beneficial to me. Although, there's a theory of it's better to have loved and lost than never have loved at all. At least he can remember that he had seen the face of this beautiful maiden as he lives his entire life alone with his sheep. So, some different things to think about in there. I don't know if the whole loved and lost if it refers to someone that you just glimpse for a minute and that then runs away immediately. That doesn't seem like actual love to me. That seems more just like torment. So, well written. I would read it, especially if you're a Lovecraft fan, to get a sense of where it began, but don't expect it to give any deep meaning to the Lovecraftian environment. Definitely read Bierce's other works, because he is just an enormously good storyteller in general and has written all sorts of very powerful pieces that are good for all sorts of reasons. And this is worth a read a couple times to get a sense of what it's about and to see how you feel about it personally. Maybe you feel very differently than I do, and that is, of course, perfectly fine. So this is Haida the Shepherd by Ambrose Bierce. It was first published in 1891. It was published right after, or a year or two after his wife cheated on him and his 17-year-old son committed suicide after his wife-to-be ran off with his best friend. And this is found in The Spark of Modernism, 20 Speculative Stories and Writings that Defined an Era, 1886 to 1939, by William Gillard, James Ryder, and Robert Stauffer. So let me know if you have any questions or different thoughts on this.